All right, we are on module 4. This is script and pre-production. All right, let's begin. Here we go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. You might notice a dog in the background. Hopefully it's not distracting. Okay. Just give me 1 second here. All right, so I'm just gonna share my screen. There we go. So script and pre-production. I'm gonna go ahead and open up my Spotlight tool and hide that. Okay, so yes, module 4, script and pre-production. This is our first formal tool. So this is gonna be our first sort of entry into understanding the formal properties at play and how to use script-based evidence as part of your analysis approach. Okay, before I get into the script and the formal elements that go along with that and the levels of encoding, I, again, usually ask this to a class with responses, but again, hopefully you can kind of internally ask yourself these questions. But question number 1, why do you watch movies? If you watch movies, why do you watch them? And what do you think the purpose of a movie is? And I'm not, again, it's weird because no one's responding to this. But as you're thinking on it, there's no right or wrong answer. Why do you watch movies? And what is the purpose of a movie? Kind of sit on that for a second. Okay. So whichever answer you provided is not wrong by any means. But, and as we kind of saw with film history, film was kind of created to be a source of entertainment, right? It was an idea to be a level of escape for the audience, to be entertained by a narrative or kind of taken aback by the spectacle of it all. And entertainment is definitely a core objective of film. But that's not really what we're concerned with in this class. We are looking at what the kind of ultimate goal of a film is. And the ultimate goal is that a film, just like any other artifact made by a person, which we'll talk about rhetorical criticism, it's an expression from someone, right? It's a message. This film can contain a message within it. And the building up of this message is through all of the levels of encoding through the formal properties of film. And again, today is our sort of first level. We're looking at the script. So just kind of going forward, keep in mind we are examining film as a form of expression, what the filmmaker is trying to say through the film. A filmmaker or a director has something to say. That message is also called the implicit meaning or the thematic objective, which we'll talk more about later. I often use these terms interchangeably, and maybe I shouldn't, but if I ever say implicit meaning, know that I also mean thematic objective. But it's essentially just what we think the filmmaker is trying to say. What topics are being explored in the film, and what is the filmmaker saying about those topics through their use of the formal tools. Okay, so just kind of going forward, keep that in mind. That's what we're exploring. I'm just checking something very quickly. Okay, good. Okay. The filmmaker has that message. They then use the medium of film to carry and share that message to audiences. We talked a little about this before, but film is a component of mass media. Mass media just means a piece of media that can be absorbed by many, right? There's quite a bit of access to film. And those messages within a film can be complicated. It can take a lot to fully unpack and understand. So sometimes there's not a clear, definitive statement, but something to provoke thought. The filmmaker then encodes the film with choices and how they apply the formal tools to communicate their message. So again, this is kind of what we're exploring, how filmmakers use the formal properties to encode a film with a message. And your job in the analysis paper and the punch discussions is to decode, right? You see the film, you start noting how those formal choices are being applied, and you interpret those choices. What do those choices mean in relation to the thematic objective or the implicit meaning? How do those formal choices lead to that message? So why is this important? Why study film in this way? For one, it's going to help you in critical and independent thinking. So this approach asks you to be objective by knowing how to pick out the formal choices, right? This is what we're doing in these first, I'm going to look at my sheet here, but all the way up until module 10, essentially, are all of the formal properties, right? We're learning the formal properties right now. So that's the sort of objective elements, knowing what a shallow depth of field is and how that's encoding a shot with meaning. But it's also subjective, and it's allowing you to lean into your interpretive skills and to find a explanation for an artifact is all kind of part of that. So that's going to help with critical and independent thinking. Also, progressive implicit meaning / thematic objective. The benefits of being open to receiving a message from a film. If that message is compelling, and if it is progressive and challenging in a healthy way, I think it can kind of help us learn more about the human condition or learn more about social injustices that the film may be exploring. Films can challenge your beliefs and perceptions, promote empathy and compassion by connecting with someone else's story, and film acts as a medium for social justice by addressing societal injustices and offering some sort of critique. That's the ideal, right? That first category is the ideal. But something that I talked about last module, I believe, was the idea of a toxic or regressive encoding, or a toxic or regressive message that is in a film. It's important that you know how to decode that, right? That you are being, not only you, but also just audiences in general are being subjected to this kind of message. Once you decode the choice, unlock the intent, assess how the subject is being depicted by the formal choices, right? Depiction, as I mentioned in the syllabus, depiction is not necessarily a celebration or the filmmaker saying that this act is okay, right? Depiction could be many things. So it's important to note how the film is exploring its topic. Is it exploring its topic to reveal injustices about the topic, to shed light on something that hasn't been exposed before, or is it encoding that message in a different way, in a regressive way? If the message is destructive, it's your job to expose it. Hold the filmmaker accountable for the message that they're communicating. Again, I used the Birth of a Nation example last class, but something that I think we still have this in film. There's plenty of problematic encoding in film. Not to pick on the movie if you're a big fan of it, but for example, I think the movie Joker has some regressive encoding when it comes to exploring mental health, right? That's an example. And it's important that we can kind of unlock what that film is trying to say if it is spreading a harmful message, possibly. But again, our primary goal, and hopefully all the films that you watch in the punch discussions, and if you choose any of the films for the companion films for your analysis, is in line with this first category, right? Us kind of interacting with a film to unlock its meaning. Okay. So as we move into the formal tools, as we move into the formal properties, the idea of spending this much time to really understand how these tools are applied, what they look like, what they sound like, how you can observe them, but also interpret them, is all about the idea that these tools, these formal properties, are, again, tools that a director can utilize to encode their film with meaning. So keep that in mind. Everything is a choice. Question the intent. How does it contribute to the film's message? And we'll explore all of these things in much more depth, but for example, today we're going over script-based encoding. And that can range from looking at specific lines of dialogue and how those lines of dialogue can link to the implicit meaning or the message or the thematic objective. Cinematography, we're going to go in depth on the 5 elements of cinematography, and you'll notice how in just one shot, there can be a high level of encoding within one shot. Something is being communicated through the use of shadows, through the use of highlights, through the use of color contrast, and then also editing. Okay, so just as a, not really a reminder, but as a preview, I guess, the formal tools, the levels of encoding that we're going to be looking at is the script, which is going to be all in today's module, module 4. We're going to go over all the sort of theoretical levels of encoding today. And in module 17, you are going to learn how to actually write a script in Master Scene Technical format. We're also going to explore a little bit with the pre-production process. Then modules 5 through 7 are cinematography and production, the photographic elements of a film. And then editing is going to be modules 8 and 9, also with some post-production. After we learn the formal properties, we're then going to move into analysis, so film theory and rhetorical criticism. Okay, so a quick definition for pre-production. Pre-production is the initial planning and preparation stage of the production process. It's the process that occurs before the movie begins to be made, before you arrive on set and start actually filming scenes. It's the moment a studio or producer buys a script and puts it in active development. It can also be during the stage of a writer writing the script. Again, it's everything before you're actually on set filming a scene. Some films get stuck in development hell where the pre-production stage goes on for far too long. Pre-production costs the studio money through development fees. The only thing I'll say about that is a lot of big movies, a lot of Hollywood films, like for example, Marvel films, go through usually long stages of pre-production, figuring out what kind of script should be written for this story, what actors are going to be cast, maybe changing out actors, maybe redeveloping the script with some new notes or a new inclusion of another character. That's all part of the sort of pre-production process. So pre-production, we're going to be focusing on the script. Basically, everything that we can see translated on screen. So we're going to explore narrative, structure, dialogue, and character as all parts of the script, and see how a script translates to screen. I think I already said that. And then module 17 is going to be the practical side, where we learn how to write a script. In the pre-production process, there's also financing. The director of photography and the director and a storyboard artist come up with the storyboards for a film, which I'll talk about later. That'll probably also be module 17. Also, auditions and rehearsals occur in the pre-production process, and any scheduling. All right, so again, this is our focus. Our focus today is the script. So you may want to be taking notes on some of these elements. So the script, this is where it all starts. A script has to be written for a movie to be made. The script is a written document by the screenwriter in a special format that serves as a blueprint for the film. That special format is called master scene format. And often, I say screenwriter, but often there are many writers on a film, even if they're not always credited. Okay, so within that written document, what you will see, and I'll show you a script. I showed you an excerpt from the Hail Caesar script 2 modules ago, I believe. But within a script, you'll see a scene-to-scene breakdown. The script will have every scene in the film listed. And within that scene, you are going to see action lines, what characters are supposed to be doing in that scene, dialogue, what characters are saying in that scene, the introduction of characters, and the overall story / plot structure. A scene-to-scene breakdown and what characters are doing in each scene. Doing and saying, I should say. So, script-based evidence. The script is the first line of encoding from the filmmaker, even if the director didn't write it. So I'm just going to pause on that for a second. Like I said, often many people are in charge with writing a script, and the director, even if they're not credited as like a co-writer, they probably had some sort of input into the script. During the process, they received the script, they developed it, they gave notes, they may have even rewritten certain sections. So even if the director isn't credited, we're still going to sort of link their encoding of the film on a script level as well. So the levels of script encoding, we have narrative, structure, which I will have on a later slide, but narrative structure, narrative sequence, so scene-to-scene creation, character actions and decisions within a scene, the inclusion of characters, character development. We're going to look at the 7 elements of character, and then dialogue, from dialogue functions to dialogue types, which again, we will go into depth on all of these elements. Whoops, did not mean to go that far. Okay, so just as a refresher, this was from the making of presentation. We're going to look at a scene from script to screen. And just as a refresher, a scene is a sequence of continuous action within one location with one or more characters. It could be a character alone in the room watching television. It could be a conversation between 2 or more characters. It could be a fight scene in a bathroom. As long as it's continuous action in one location, that is a scene. Whenever the location and or time changes, we have a new scene. So as soon as we move locations, new scene. If we come back to that location at a later time in the film, it's also a new scene. Another way to look at a scene is the setting of action. So with this video, what you're going to see here is you're going to see a scene from the film Training Day, and the video will cut from the finished scene, so you'll see like the actual scene from the film, and every now and then it'll cut back to the script. So you'll actually see the script on the screen as you kind of hear audio from the film playing over it. And it'll cut back to the film. Excuse me, it'll cut back to the film every now and then. And I just kind of want you to take note. What things are you seeing in the script that are then being replicated on screen? So what details from the script are included in the film scene? Consider action, what characters are doing in the scene, dialogue, what characters are saying in the scene, down to character description. If there's any lines about how the character should look, from like costume design. Consider, how does the film scene differ from the script? What things are not in the script? I'll give you a hint. There's no shots. There are no shots that are listed in the script. So that's just one thing that the director, that's one of the elements of encoding of a director in adapting the script to the screen. And then think of how the script serves as a blueprint for the filmed scene. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. There we go.
A pesar de los problemas que enfrenta el peso mexicano, era un economista de reconocimiento de agricultura de Estados Unidos. Debido a la pérdida de valor del peso, estima que las exportaciones bajarán sobre por durante este año.
Good morning, sir.
Pero a largo plazo, verán
No, thank you, ma'am.
No, get some chow in you before we go to the office. My dollar.
Thank you, sir. But, hey.
All right, fine, don't.
It's nice here.
I read my paper?
I'm sorry, sir.
Thank you.
You know what? I'll get something to eat.
No, hell no, you won't. You fuck that up. I'm trying to read my paper. Please, shut up.
No, I sure wouldn't mind not roasting a hot black and white all summer.
Tell me a story. Wait.
Like my story?
No, not your story. A story. Since you can't keep your mouth shut long enough for me to read my paper, tell me a story.
I don't think I know any stories.
You don't know any stories?
No.
All right, I'll tell you a story. This is a newspaper, right? It's 90% bullshit, but it's entertaining. That's why I read it, because it entertains me. You won't let me read it, so you entertain me with your bullshit. Tell me a story right now. Go.
Well, there was a DUI stop.
A DUI stop.
It was quiet night. We're rolling on Van Owen. I'm driving. This Acura, just a beautiful car, comes out a side street, all over the median, in excess. I light it up, hit the whaler. Guy drives on like I'm invisible for 10 blocks before he pulls over. All right, plates run clean, and so I field test and arrest, and I'm belting him in our unit, and Debbie's tossing his car. She calls me over to the vehicle and shows me a snub 38 and 2 shotguns, fully loaded and locked.
No shit.
No shit. So she calls our supervisor, and I keep searching. I find 500 grams of meth in the dash. Turns out this DUI is on bail for distribution. He's on his way to smoke his ex-partner before trial.
Okay, so again, it's a little bit different for me because you're doing this individually and we're not talking about it as a group. But hopefully you noticed some influences of the script to the screen, right? Some are pretty obvious, but others are a little more subtle. But let's just maybe look at a few things. And I'm gonna mute this. So the scene starts and we get our kind of introduction to the diner. Jake enters the diner, and now let's go to the script. And I'm going to hide that. So interior coffee shop day, old and tire near Good Samaritan Hospital. Jake struts through the door, confidently looks around. Now, here's a line, Jake's POV. We don't see that shot, right? Again, usually there aren't shots listed. Sometimes they'll mention things like this, but again, the person who wrote this is David Ayer, but the person who directed it is Antoine Fuqua, right? So the director didn't decide to shoot a subjective POV shot. But we see this, and then we have an introduction of Detective Sergeant Alonzo Harris in a black shirt, black leather jacket, and more description of his costume design. And then we say back to scene, so back to Jake walking over, slides on across. Alonzo's eyes will never leave his newspaper. Jake's first line of dialogue is "Good morning, sir." So let's go back to our scene.
Debido a la pérdida de valor del peso, estima que las recomendaciones bajarán los depósitos durante
Good morning, sir.
Pero a largo plazo, verán
No, thank you, ma'am.
No, get some check.
Okay, and you saw in the script it even says waitress approaches the table with coffee. Excuse me. And we'll see that note from the script that Alonzo doesn't look up from his newspaper. Okay, so again, we're seeing details of blocking, but more another thing that we're seeing is dialogue. The dialogue is almost verbatim to the script. There are a few things that the actors change along the way, but for the most part, it's pretty close. So I'll kind of park on this for a second, and as you read over the dialogue, now we'll hear a little bit of it.
Hot black and white all summer.
Tell me a story. Wait.
Like my story?
No, not your story. A story.
Okay, and then just a couple of things, right? There's little changes that like Denzel Washington offered. So like, for example, when he says, "Tell me a story," Alonzo says here, "Alonzo, tell me a story, Hoyt." The amount of a pause before he says Hoyt, that's all up to the actor and working with the director. But notice that the action lines are pretty lean, which is a few mentions of blocking. Alonzo sighs, carefully folds his paper, glares at Jake. Dialogue, dialogue, dialogue. Alonzo's dialogue, Jake's dialogue, so on. Alonzo waves the paper in Jake's face. Alonzo, this is a newspaper, etc. So just kind of keep that in mind, what's in a script and what's not, and how much of the adaptation process it is from going script to screen. Okay. All right, I got a little lost in my share screen. There we go. And let's go back to PowerPoint. Let me make sure to remove that. Okay. Well, I probably should have parked on this, but we already talked about it. This is just another excerpt from the script. Again, I kind of paused on this when we were watching the video, but if you ever want to kind of take note of the page, it's on here as well. All right, so the components of a script, and now this is the practical stuff, which again, we'll go over more on in Module 17, but the screenplay format is in 3 parts. Again, that format is called master scene format. So for every scene, there's a scene heading, there are action lines and descriptions, and dialogue with character cues or character boxes. So I'm going to kind of go back to the script for just a second, and I'll use my annotate tool. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. I'll move that out of the way. So we have our scene heading, the slug line, interior coffee shop day. I'll talk more about this with encoding, but we know that the scene is taken inside, interior, rather than exterior, which would be EXT. Then we have the location, coffee shop. Then we have day or night, day. Then we have our action line or a description. So this serves as a description for the location. Now we have some action. Jake struts through the door, confidently looks around. And again, notice how sort of lean the action is. It's not overly descriptive. And then you have your character cues or character boxes. So Jake, centered in the page. Jake, that's the character box. And then the dialogue, good morning, sir. Okay. So I just want to go that quickly. All right. So again, we're going to go over how to actually write a script in Module 17. We'll go much further. For now, I just want to make sure we understand what is actually on the page of a script, how much is on the page versus how much is translated when the director is actually filming the scene. So we have scene-to-scene breakdown of plot, right? The overall plot structure. Every scene of the film is in the script. I think that's an important thing to kind of take away. The scene heading, scene and character descriptions, actions, broad blocking, character decisions, and then dialogue. Okay, so now we're moving into the actual sort of formal elements that you would decode using script-based evidence. So we kind of have this in 4 different parts, which I mentioned at the top of this presentation. But we have narrative, structure, character, dialogue. And we're going to sort of investigate each one. Okay. So narrative. Narrative is the story, cause, and effect sequence occurring over time and features characters, places, and events. So to kind of boil this down, narrative is broken into story and plot. Story are the narrative elements presented on screen and all the events that are implicit. So story is sort of the overall synopsis, right? An overview of the 3 acts of a film, while the plot is much more specific. Plot is the specific actions and events to convey the story. It's beat to beat, scene to scene breakdown. It's the structure of action and emotion. And I have sort of a goofy example, but I think it explains it relatively well. So if our story in the film, let's pretend this is a short film. In our short film is that the story is Bob went to the store and bought a carton of soy milk. This communicates the story. We know the beginning, middle, and end. But we don't have all the details. We don't have the scene to scene. We don't have a cause and effect. why did Bob end up with the soy milk? Which we do get in our plot synopsis. After Bob woke up, he made himself a bowl of cereal when he realized that he was out of milk. He then locked up the house, drove down to the local Target, and made his way to the dairy section. He scanned the several shelves but found out that there was only 2% milk. Bob asked an employee working in the dairy section if the store carried 1% milk. Unfortunately for Bob, this Target store only carries 2%. Therefore, Bob decided to buy a carton of soy milk. So this tells us Bob was actually looking for 1% milk, wasn't looking for soy milk. He went to Target. We learned that he was making cereal in the morning. We learned that he lives in a house, and that the result of buying the soy milk was because they didn't have his 1% milk and he didn't want 2% milk, right? So these are all the cause and effects of the overall story of Bob's journey. Okay, something else I want to introduce is the idea of narrative choice, and this will kind of go further with will to act, which I'll talk about later. But keep in mind, the writer has all of these levels of influence into the script. The writer and the director. Again, the director can give notes on all of these elements. But when writing the script, the writer has the choice of creating or eliminating scenes. So whenever you see a scene in a film, think about, why is this scene here? What is this scene trying to communicate? Either thematically, about the characters, maybe about the plot. It's serving some sort of purpose. Also think about scenes that you're not seeing on screen. What are scenes that are only implied? So like backstory, or maybe even sort of ellipses in time. There's a reason that we're cutting from the coffee shop to the police station. Well, how do they get from the coffee shop to the police station? There's a reason to remove that segment, that scene, from the coffee shop to the police station, for example. The screenwriter creates narrative sequence. The sequence of scenes, how scene 1 leads to scene 2, and context before and after action. So there's a couple things I place in here. The idea that the director or producers can also have influence in this, right? So I used the Training Day example just a second ago. So if we start in the coffee shop, and then the next scene is Detective Alonzo and Detective Jake. I don't know why I'm saying their first names. Detective Alonzo Harris and Detective Jake Hoyt go from the coffee shop. The next scene, they're in the police station. Okay, that's in the script. Maybe when the director receives it, the director goes, well, how did they get to the police station? Can we include a scene of them traveling to the police station in the car? Okay, well, within the car, let's actually write a little scene. What do you want them to say? Those sequence of scenes are all critical. What story elements are being presented and what aren't? The choice of what a character does or doesn't do in a given scene. So this is a big one. This is going to link to the will to act later on with our 7 elements of character, but the way how a character decides to complete their objective tells us a lot about them. Excuse me. So always consider what actions are taken or not taken in a scene. The choice of one character reacting to another or not reacting. These are all levels of encoding. If someone is giving a speech and you have a cutaway reaction to someone else frowning at their speech, that is encoding in some way. That is telling us how maybe we should be responding to this speech. Another thing is the idea of encoding symbols and motifs. So you'll see, again, I'm kind of hinting at this already, but your reflection paper today, I'm going to show you a bunch of key scenes, which I'll talk about later, from the movie Black Panther. And when you watch that, you're going to see some of these things. And one of them is the idea of encoding symbols and motifs. So a symbol is something that is metaphorical for something else. So in Black Panther, one symbol is vibranium, and vibranium being a crucial resource. Vibranium is a fake thing, but it's metaphorical for something in relation to Black Panther. And that's all in the script, right? It was in the script that, I forget the character's name, Claw is trying to get vibranium in Wakanda. It's also in the script that Eric Killmonger also wants vibranium. They want it for very different reasons, right? These are all, it's metaphorical for something else, this idea of a natural resource. Okay, there are two types of stories. You have plot-driven stories and you have character-driven stories. Often these two sort of overlap, but just to kind of delineate it a little bit, plot-driven stories, the focus is on plot and favors plot twists, action, and external conflict. It's the development of a situation rather than a character. Now, often the character develops along with the situation, right? How they accomplish the task is also developing the character in some way. And that can be argued with Star Wars, which is my example here. But often a plot-driven story is sort of objective-based. The character either wins or loses. It's not so much observational on one character. So in this example, Star Wars, the protagonist, Luke Skywalker, his objective is to blow up the Death Star. And by the end of the movie, he blows it up. So he wins. That being said, it kind of bleeds into our next example, a character-driven story. Because you could argue that Luke's character develops through the process of completing this objective. So I use Iron Man in this example. Before I get there, let me just define it. So character-driven stories is the other type. The focus is on character dynamics, inner conflict, psychology, and development, and how personal evolution / decisions change plot / story. And I think the kind of key here is that the character grows via the repercussions of actions. So I use Iron Man as an example. And Iron Man is also sort of a plot-driven film, right? It's kind of like Star Wars in that way. They kind of bleed over. But I think what makes Iron Man maybe more of a character-driven story than, say, Star Wars is that we're focused solely on Tony Stark and that his character goes through quite a transformation through the repercussions of his actions. So in the first act of the film, Tony Stark is a weapons dealer, right? He is like a billionaire by selling weapons all around the world. And eventually he gets taken as a prisoner of war and he sees the destruction that his weapons are creating around the world, right? He sees the horrors of his monetary benefits, right? And this changes him. This tells him, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I can no longer profit from the harm of selling these weapons. So he becomes a superhero. He becomes Iron Man to go around the world and literally destroy the weapons he created and sold. So we see a growth of this character, right? He has grown via the repercussions of his actions. Okay, so I think that explains it. I kind of already answered this as I was going. But yeah, the core of narrative is the progression / arc of a character. I'll talk more about the character arc in a second, but just keep that in mind. Often the implicit meaning or thematic objective or message of the film is very closely tied to the arc of the character. That's often what the film is trying to communicate. They're using the arc of this character as sort of a metaphor. Okay. So to keep going here, and I mentioned this already, but we have two levels of meaning. One is explicit, so explicit meaning, and implicit meaning. Explicit meaning is surface level. It's the plot. What is the movie about? What's just the basic sequence of events? So for example, for Batman vs. Superman, the story, the explicit meaning, the synopsis, Batman wants to fight Superman because he thinks Superman destroyed Metropolis and his existence is a threat to humankind. That is the explicit meaning. That is just the surface level, basic sequence of events. What's important is the implicit meaning. Now, before I launch into implicit meaning, I want to kind of define what theme is in sort of relation. So what is a theme? Theme is the meaning revealed by the story, the message behind the story. It's the central ideas of the story, the topics of the story, the topics that the film explores. These are all themes. A movie can have dozens of themes. Some themes can be very broad, like love, death, injustice, corruption. So often you want to use themes as sort of a primer for your thematic objective or implicit meaning take. So the implicit meaning. Implicit meaning is the implied or subtextual meaning of the film. I think the best way to define the implicit meaning and thematic objective is, what do you think the movie is exploring, and what do you think the film is saying about those topics? So think beyond the plot, not the surface level meaning, not just the basic sequence of events. What is the moral of the story? Is the plot a metaphor for something greater? Is the protagonist's arc a metaphor for something greater? Is the film saying something about society? Is it saying something about the human condition? What themes and topics is the film exploring? Greed, love, morality, war. Again, what topics / themes the film is exploring, and what is being said about those topics / themes. So my example, my theme that I extrapolated from Batman vs. Superman is xenophobia. That's the broad theme that I think the film is exploring. And just to quickly define xenophobia, it means the fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners. Now, to kind of keep going further for the implicit meaning, I'm going to offer a little bit of a filmic example. So this is just sort of plot related, but what we learn by the third act of the film and sort of through Batman's character arc is that Batman's fear of an alien, Superman, is destructive in itself, and the concern is misplaced, as the true threat is a domestic one, as represented by Lex Luthor. So looking at that sort of metaphorical plot, what do you think the film is saying about xenophobia? What is the statement on that theme? Give you a second. Okay, so I'm going to kind of get into what I think it is, what I think the implicit meaning and thematic objective is. I guess I don't have, I thought I had it on my own separate thing. Okay, so I guess I'll just answer. I thought I had it on a separate slide. I don't. Well, what I think the movie's saying about xenophobia with that plot as a metaphor is that xenophobia is empty and destructive, right? Batman has caused more harm in having this fear and hatred of Superman. And he's become ignorant of true threats, true domestic threats. And that sort of hatred is destructive. So I think the film is saying that the fear and hatred of strangers or foreigners is, A, regressive, but B, self-harming and destructive. And that by the end of the film, Batman and Superman team up to fight the true threat. Okay. If you're ever having difficulty finding the implicit meaning, which we'll get into all of this when we get into rhetorical criticism and film, let me rephrase that, rhetorical criticism and film theory. But sometimes you'll use these narrative objectives as sort of primers. So often if you unlock the theme or you unlock the topic, start thinking about how these connect to narrative objectives. How is the film encouraging action, defending or justifying an act, teaching, instructing, or offering lessons, conveying truths and values about a culture, challenging perceptions, clarifying thinking, managing or resolving conflict, or counter-conventional knowledge? So just kind of going forward, I already said this before, this term, but thematic objective. We will use the term thematic objective throughout this course. It's pretty much synonymous with implicit meaning. The analysis papers are centered around your takeaway of the implicit meaning of a film. That's a thematic objective. What do you think the implicit meaning is? That's a thematic objective. So it's not only your interpretation of the film, but also your support of that interpretation. So your defense of that objective using filmic evidence. Filmic evidence are the formal tools, the implementation of the formal tools to encode a scene with meaning. What do you think the filmmaker is saying about the themes being presented in the film? Again, thematic objective equals implicit meaning. All right, so we'll do a little activity here. Again, hopefully you're doing this on your own when I ask these questions. But let's look at the movie Avatar from 2009. What is the explicit meaning of the film, and what is the implicit meaning? Okay, so what is this, the sort of plot synopsis, the overall story, surface level meaning, that's explicit meaning. And then what's the implicit meaning? What is the subtextual meaning? What is the message of the film? What topics is the film exploring, or what is it saying about those topics? So I'll just kind of let you sit on that for a second, and I'll park on our explicit meaning photograph here as you're thinking about it, trying to maybe remember Avatar. Okay. So I have just kind of some basic plot beats of the explicit meaning. Now, when you do the plot synopsis for like your analysis paper, which again, we'll talk more about later, it does not have to be this in depth. But I'm just kind of going over these main beats so the implicit meaning makes a little bit more sense. In 2154, the humans deplete Earth's natural resources, which leads to a severe energy crisis. An alien planet called Pandora is populated by the native species Na'vi. I'm just going to pause here for a second. You can already maybe start seeing some symbolism with the alien planet being called Pandora and the native species on that planet being called Na'vi. Pandora is rich with a valuable mineral called unobtainium, another symbol, which could revitalize Earth's atmosphere. The US government deploys scientists and a militarized private security force in an attempt to convince the Na'vi to allow mining on Pandora. Due to the environmental repercussions of mining, the Na'vi turned down the offer. US initiates a hostile takeover of Pandora via the militarized private security force. Okay, so that is the explicit meaning. Obviously, there's more to it as well, like the whole thing with, I think the character's name is like Jake Scully, becoming an avatar and befriending the Na'vi and being welcomed by the Na'vi, right? That's all part of it too, but this is just the kind of general plot synopsis. Okay, now we know the explicit meaning. Now start linking it to the implicit meaning. What is that plot a metaphor for? What do you think the writer-director, James Cameron, is really trying to communicate through that plot? How is it a metaphor? How is it maybe a stand-in for something else? And maybe think back on some narrative objectives. Okay. So again, I'm just going to give you a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to turn over to my implicit meaning interpretation. All right. So again, what is the filmmaker, James Cameron, trying to communicate through this narrative? What could this plot be a metaphor for? Some ones that I think link are to teach, instruct, or offer lessons, to convey truths and values about a culture, to challenge perceptions, to clarify thinking. All right. So, some of my implicit takes. Cameron attempts to clarify thinking in terms of colonization. By crafting a science fiction adventure, Cameron reminds audiences of the horrors white settlers committed onto Native Americans via a metaphorical plot. To start deconstructing some of the symbols, Pandora is a stand-in for America. Again, before European white settlers came. And unobtainium is a stand-in for the land and natural resources. And then the Na'vi are sort of metaphorical encoding for Native Americans. The US deploys scientists and military personnel to negotiate. Excuse me, my apologies. let me go back one step. So the sort of metaphorical plot beat that I'm deconstructing here, in the film, US deploys scientists and military personnel to negotiate. Okay, the real take here, the implicit take there is white settlers arrive, Washington attempts to civilize Native Americans. Okay, my next plot beat. Navi doesn't give in, which leads to a violent attack by the military. Okay, so then the implicit take, whites committed acts of mass murder onto Native Americans. The government initiated Indian removal, which also led to the Trail of Tears. So, whoops, didn't mean to go that far. Just to kind of park on that for a second. This is just one interpretation, right? My interpretation here is that James Cameron is, again, using a piece of mass media, using a huge blockbuster film to sort of remind American audiences of colonization. And maybe not just American audiences, right? I mean, colonization, unfortunately, has happened around the world. But I think it's a pretty clear stand-in for the colonization in America. Another take, and I think James Cameron mentioned this, and I didn't do much research into what his approach was, but when this film came out, 2009, we were still in, I guess we're still sort of involved, but we were sort of completely into the war in Iraq. And he was saying that his film was sort of a metaphor on that too. So, that's another implicit take. Okay. So keep in mind, the explicit meaning is only surface. Always investigate the intricacies of the plot and how the plot could be metaphorical. Whenever you're sort of unlocking the implicit meaning of a film, it's never just the story, right? The story is always a stand-in for something. It's communicating some sort of experience. So always consider, why is the writer / filmmaker crafting this story / narrative? What topics are they exploring? What are they saying about the topics? What is the sequence of the narrative? Choices of scenes and characterizations? What is that communicating about the topics that the film is exploring? Just for example, it's a choice by James Cameron to have the Na'vi in Avatar be peaceful, right? Consider an alternative narrative for Avatar. What if the Na'vi were actually evil aliens attempting to invade Earth? That would totally recontextualize what Avatar is about, right? That would communicate a very different implicit meaning. So again, it's a choice. It's a choice that he presented the film's narrative the way that he did. And that's valid for every film. So always investigate the deeper narrative there. Okay. So this is something I want to introduce early, because you're going to be investigating key scenes in your analysis paper, and we're going to be doing some key scene breakdowns, essentially, in Module 10, I believe. So what are key scenes? Key scenes are scenes that are crucial in developing and communicating the thematic objective / implicit meaning. They carry the themes / topics of the film. Key scenes are the critical moments of a character's arc in the film. Key decisions, crucial decisions. Every scene in a film is important, but among those numerous scenes, there are a select number that are essential in communicating the message of a film. So before I even kind of get to my example, films can have hundreds of scenes. Usually they have maybe like 30, but it can range, right? And to do an analysis paper on a film and investigate every scene is impossible. So when we get to the analysis, and I talk about how to write an analysis, I'm going to ask you to just pick usually 3 key scenes that are very pivotal in landing the thematic objective. So for example, one key scene in Avatar is the destruction of the Tree of Souls by the military. It communicates the themes of humans' destruction of nature and a mark of colonization, right? This idea that, colonizers are destroying something that is sacred, right? Something that is sacred and a piece of nature that means a lot to the native people of this land, and that colonizer are coming in and totally decimating the land and desecrating the land, I should say. Okay. So some narrative elements I want to just kind of quickly define are flashbacks and dreams. Flashbacks, these are a narrative device for presenting a character's memory to the audience. Usually how you see a flashback in a film is the action of the film is sort of presented as normal, and then it will cut from the present narrative to a past event. And sometimes there'll be like a transition, like a dissolve, which we'll look at in editing. But all you need to know, flashbacks are narrative devices to present the past. Dreams are usually presented as a reveal, can offer some insight into the character. For example, nightmares can reveal anxieties for a character. Okay, so now we're going to move into structure. Okay, so let's get into structure. We're mostly going to talk about 3-act structure with some hero's journey, and you'll see how those two sort of narrative structure approaches are very similar and mirror one another. Okay, so 3-act structure. And I'll talk about this and kind of park on a graphic as we talk about it. But just very quickly, most narratives fit within a 3-act structure in some way. And the way that it works is Act 1 is the setup. This is the first 25% of the story, the beginning. It introduces us to the central character, some of the side characters, starts to establish relationships with other characters. It also hints at the conflict or the protagonist, which we'll talk about later, is trying to accomplish by the end of the narrative. And it starts building up the world of the narrative, the environment for this character. Excuse me. Then we move into Act 2, which is the confrontation. This is the middle 50% of the story. With the confrontation, usually what you see are a series of obstacles, a series of hurdles and tests that the protagonist has to, what's what I'm looking for, interact with. The confrontation, Act 2, we complicate matters and develop conflict and test the protagonist. And what's very crucial here is, again, and I kind of mentioned this before, but the protagonist will to act. The actions that the protagonist takes in completing their objective and overcoming hurdles and tells us something about them. That leads to their character arc, their character progression. Then we move from Act 2, all the kind of series of tests and obstacles, into Act 3, which is the resolution. This is the end, the last 25% of the story. The conflict is resolved. The protagonist has either completed their objective or failed at their objective. Often they come back to their sort of home or the ordinary world, which again, we'll see this mirrored with the hero's journey. And just to kind of look at the graphic, again, we have Act 1, the first 25% of the story, which is the beginning. The inciting incident. Inciting incident is sort of like the first major event that gets the protagonist into gear to start their journey, to pursue their objective. Then when they're about to go and complete their goal, they have second thoughts. It's the refusal of the call, which we'll get to with the hero's journey in just a second. But they have doubt. Then they move past that and they enter Act 2, which is the confrontation, the series of obstacles and tests that they have to overcome to complete their objective. Then we move into Act 3. And right before at the climax of Act 3, let me go back one step. The climax of Act 2, usually they have their kind of ultimate confrontation with the antagonist, which again we'll talk about later. But this is the character that kind of stands in the way of the central character. And once the protagonist kind of overcomes this, they move into Act 3, which offers a resolution and descending action, where usually this is the time they sort of reflect back on their journey, now being changed in some way from their journey. And again, we'll see this with the hero's journey, and I'll talk a little bit more with that. I'm not going to read over all the 7 major plot points, but again, you'll see how these sort of interact with 3-act structure. But often there's a backstory, catalyst, the big event, midpoint, the crisis, the climax, and the realization. What I am going to focus on is the hero's journey. So the hero's journey, something you may have already heard about. I'm sure you've seen many films that use the hero's journey. But this is essentially like a narrative theory coined by Joseph Campbell. It's a theory that most movies, more specifically most narratives, contain a mythological journey for its protagonist. We'll define protagonist pretty soon, but for now, protagonist just means the central character, the main character. Films such as Star Wars and Apocalypse Now follow this structure. I don't know why I used 2 movies, 7. Many films follow this structure in some way, and they don't even have to be sort of high adventures. A lot of dramas in one way kind of journey. So I'm going to kind of talk through the hero's journey. And again, you'll probably notice how a lot of this mirrors the 3-act structure. And just because I think it's easy, I'm going to use Lord of the Rings. And this is kind of cheating because Lord of the Rings is a trilogy of films. But just kind of look at it as one large narrative. Excuse my cough drop. Okay, so using the hero's journey, let's apply this to Lord of the Rings. So we begin, I'll use my little annotate tool. And don't worry, I won't spend like an hour on this, but I just want to talk it through. Let me move this out of the way. There we go. And, okay, there we go. Okay, so we start in Act 1, essentially, right? The setup. Here's our protagonist, Frodo. Took me a second to remember his name. But here's Frodo, let's pretend, and they're in the known world. They're in their home, right? We're introduced to them in their own sort of environment. So here you are with Frodo in the Shire, right? Hobbit town. We see Frodo interacting with his friends. We understand his character relationships with Sam and all the other Hobbit friends, and they're having a great time. So we're in the known world in the Shire, being introduced to key characters and their relationships. Then we get the call to adventure, or the inciting incident. The call to adventure for Frodo is Gandalf, which we'll get to here with the supernatural aid, or the mentor, sort of connects to this as well. Comes through to Frodo and says, hey, Frodo, there's this ring here that your uncle has that in the wrong hands will destroy the world. Frodo goes, oh man, well, what do I need to do? And Gandalf says, well, you got to take this ring. You got to get out of the Shire. You have to travel down to, let me see if I can remember this, Helm's Deep, and throw this ring into the volcano in Helm's Deep. Frodo goes, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. So we kind of keep moving through here. And again, usually there's a refusal of the call, which again, if you go back to the 3-act structure, the character having doubt. Eventually, the protagonist decides to pursue the goal. And we have the threshold, crossing the threshold. So notice right here, we go from the known world into the unknown. And if anyone's seen The Lord of the Rings, the first one, Fellowship of the Ring, there's a very crucial plot moment where Frodo goes with his Hobbit friends, Sam and the other guys, I don't remember their names. But as he's traveling out of the Shire, he stops and he tells Sam, hey, this is the first time I've ever gone this far away from the Shire. I've never stepped over this part. It's a very explicit excuse me, explicit reference to crossing the threshold. So they move over out of the known world into the unknown. The protagonist begins their journey. They move past the threshold and they pursue their objective. So as they're traveling the unknown, they're out. Frodo is out of the Shire, starting to travel to Helm's Deep, or Mordor, I think. Again, I'm a little rusty on my Lord of the Rings terminology. So that he travels through on his way of completing the goal of throwing the ring in the volcano. He gets some help. So we have helpers. Again, for Frodo, you got Sam and all his Hobbit friends, and then Aragorn and all those other guys. They help him in completing his objective. Along the way, he has his mentor, which often is the supernatural aid, which is Gandalf in this case. And eventually it gets to the point where the protagonist has to leave their mentor. Again, if you've seen the first Lord of the Rings, Gandalf dies, spoilers, but eventually comes back in a weird way. And then they have to kind of pursue their goal by themselves. But anyway, so they are mentor, Gandalf, helper, Aragorn, all the other hobbits. And they pursue their goal with a bunch of challenges and temptations. So now we're in Act 2, right? The confrontation, all of the tests, the objective to overcome. As they finally reach usually sort of like a critical moment or the ultimate confrontation. So we say here the revelation, the abyss, death, and rebirth. This can be a couple of things in the film. We'll again kind of, this is sort of the moment when Frodo is finally tempted again by the ring, and he has to make the ultimate choice of either keeping the ring or throwing it down the volcano. He decides here to throw it down the volcano, destroying the ring. This leads to Frodo's transformation. He learns that he is also, there's evil forces. Not everything is the Shire. Not everything is this peaceful, great place where everyone's happy. There is oppression in the world. There's evil forces at play in the world. And he's no longer as naive as he was before. And he also knows that he can be tempted by like the evil forces. And he makes sort of his travel back to the Shire, right? We're starting to kind of enter into the resolution. And he's kind of reflecting back on his journey. He's moving out from the unknown, returning back to the known world, returning back to the Shire. And we finally reach the return. And at the return, the protagonist thinks back on the journey. They recognize how they have changed from sort of a naive place to now understanding more about the world. That is a very fast summary of The Lord of the Rings with the hero's journey. But hopefully you sort of understand this narrative structure and how it connects to 3-act structure as well. Okay. So again, narrative elements, story, plot, choice, implicit meaning or thematic objective, explicit meaning, and key scenes. Structure, we went over 3-act structure with the setup, confrontation, resolution, hero's journey, and character arc, which I have on, I believe, a separate slide. Yeah, it's here. I don't know why I have it that early. So I'll kind of redefine character arc in just a second. But we saw it with the Lord of the Rings example, right? Frodo's transformation, that's a character arc. His growth as a character. Okay, so now we're moving into character. Again, I use these terms already, but just to kind of cleanly define them. We have the protagonist. The protagonist is the central character who usually has a goal that they are attempting to achieve by the end of the narrative. They usually have the most screen time and is usually the first person we meet. To be clear, protagonist does not equal morality in any way. Protagonist doesn't have to be the hero of the story. They don't have to be altruistic. They can be morally corrupt in some way. Protagonist just means that that's the character we follow in the narrative. The antagonist is a character who stands in the way of the protagonist in an attempt to block them from achieving their goal. Excuse me. They're the oppositional character. And again, much like with the protagonist, that doesn't mean they're the villain, right? They might be trying to be the, upholding morality in some way, or enforcing justice way by stopping the protagonist. That's not always the case. Usually the film wants us to kind of be rooting for the protagonist. Excuse me. The collision of the protagonist and antagonist is what creates conflict. The Lord of the Rings example is kind of strange because we have a series of antagonists. I would probably say the most crucial antagonist is Gollum, as he frequently kind of stands in the way of Frodo destroying the ring. And the film sort of ends with the ultimate conflict between the two of them as they literally fight over the ring at the top of the volcano until Gollum falls into the volcano. Okay, so some more character elements. You have symbolic characters. Often characters are symbolic. They're metaphors for certain ideas. A character may represent a certain philosophy or even entity. That's all I want to say about that for now. Character arc. This is the transformation or inner journey of a character over the course of the story. Gradual transformation for the character. A character's arc is often linked to the thematic objective / implicit meaning. Again, character arc is just how the character changes from Act 1 to Act 3, essentially. How they have now changed from their journey. Usually it's their perspective or outlook that has changed in some way. Character depth. Character depth is how a film demonstrates the various sides and degrees of a character. How the character thinks, feels, what they hide from others, backstory, and more explicitly, the seven elements of character, which is something we are going to talk about and we'll do a video activity with. So the 7 elements of the character, these are the things that kind of breathe life into a character, also link to the implicit meaning in some way. So here we go. The character usually has a goal and an opposition. So the goal is, what does the character want? They also have a motivation. Why does the character want what they want? What does that motivation tell you about the character? So I always kind of use this example. A goal is very surface level, right? And in a lot of films, a goal for a character is like a bag of money. That's a surface level goal. What makes that character interesting is, what is their motivation? Why do they want to accomplish this goal? Why does this character want the money? So you can have one character that wants the bag of money to go and retire in, I don't know, Florida, right? It's this career criminal who wants to do the last big heist to just go retire in Florida. Okay, well, that tells us something about that character. Well, another motivation could be this, I don't know, this person is, financially, their child is sick, and they need to pull off this heist and get this case of money to pay for their sick child's medical bills. That's but that's the idea of a different motivation for the same goal. And you might be rooting for one character over the other. Again, the motivation will sort of link us to the thematic objective and give us a little bit more insight into a character. Backstory. What is the character's past? How does it inform their perspective or personality? Sometimes the backstory is stated. A character will literally speak their backstory. This is dialogue functioning as character building, which we'll get to in a bit. But often the backstory is implied. Usually it's through like costume design or even like tattoos, or you'll see like a framed photograph, or maybe other characters will talk about that character and speak to their backstory. And usually in some way that backstory influences that character's current personality and outlook. A lot of times there's trauma in a character's backstory. Okay, empathy. What makes the character human, vulnerable? What gives them the ability to change? In my opinion, the most compelling characters are ones that are flawed, that have human flaws, that need to grow by the end of the narrative. I've already mentioned this before, but the character's will to act. Action reveals character. What is it about how the character pursues their goal that informs the character? will to act is one of the more subtle character developmental features where the writer and the director choose how a character will accomplish a task. And again, they may do it in different ways, and that will tell us something about them. Again, I don't really want to keep using this weird heist example, but we'll keep doing it. If one character pulls off the heist and they have a strict code where they don't use lethal force, right? Maybe they use like, I don't know, flash grenades, okay? Right, they have a creed where they will not use lethal force to get that bag of money. Well, that gives us something, right? Of them not wanting to hurt anybody in the pursuit of pulling off the heist. Informs that character very differently if they were reckless, if they didn't care about human life, right? If they went in guns blazing to pull off a heist. That will develop a character very differently. And it gives us a little bit of insight into their morality, into their ethics, into their outlook. Okay, that's going to move into point of view. What is the character's belief system? Is it toxic or progressive or somewhere in between? What is their world view? Or what is their perspective on a topic that the film is exploring? Again, that will often link to the implicit meaning. And many times if that happens, that character's symbolic in some way. And 7, character relations. How does the character see others? What about their relationship with other characters inform them? Do they have a romantic, power, or familial relationship? How do side characters test or influence the protagonist? The takeaway here is we often get character depth based on how one character interacts with another. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit here. In this next video, we'll see a key scene from the film Unforgiven between Will, played by Clint Eastwood, and Ned, played by Morgan Freeman, and start linking to Ned and the relationship between them. Some things to look out for is backstory and character relations. Excuse me. So note what we learn, but also how does Will see his past? How does he see his kind of previous self? And then with empathy, what makes Will empathetic? Is he empathetic despite his past? And then character relations, what could we infer about the relationship between Will and Ned just by the way they're interacting with one another? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share. Try that one more time. Okay. There we go.
She don't like it much, does she? You riding off with me.
Sally?
You gave me the evil eye.
Well, you know, Sally's engine and engines ain't over friendly, Will.
I don't blame her. I ain't gonna hold it against her. She knew me back then. She knew what a no good son of a bitch I was. She just ain't allowing that I've changed. She don't realize I ain't like that no more.
Well, you know, Will.
I ain't the same, Ned. Claudia, she straightened me up. Cleared me of drinking whiskey and all. And just because we're going on this killing, that don't mean I'm going to go back to being the way I was. I just need the money. Get a new start for them youngsters.
Yeah.
Ned, you remember that drover I shot through the mouth and his teeth came out the back of his head? I think about him now and again. He didn't do anything to deserve to get shot. At least nothing I could remember when I sobered up.
He was one crazy son of a bitch, Will.
Yeah, no one liked me. The boys all thought I was gonna shoot him out of pure meanness.
No. You ain't like that no more.
Eagle, he hated my guts. Bonaparte didn't think too much of me either.
Quincy neither, I reckon.
No. Quincy used to just watch all the time. Scared.
Well, like I said, you ain't like that no more.
That's right. I'm just a fella now. I ain't no different than anyone else. No more.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. Again, right, this is a little bit different because normally we would just talk about this as a class. But reflect on some things you learned about Will, which is Clint Eastwood's character. So we learned about his backstory. We learned that he, this term wasn't introduced in the Old West, but he was probably an alcoholic, and that influenced his violent behavior. He came from a violent past. He was he was an outlaw. He was a murderer. And we learned that his possibly wife or his love, that's what I'm looking for, reformed him in some way, right? Helped him quit drinking and also stopped his violent tendencies. We learn some empathy here on top of that backstory, that Will is regretful for his violent past, right? He doesn't look back on it fondly, as he talks about the murder of, I forget what that character is, but he talks about it, saying that the guy didn't deserve it, and he learned that after he sobered up. So he's regretful of that, even though he's on this journey to murder again for pay. It's not something he's looking forward to doing. So again, we start learning some things about motivation, some empathy, backstory, and we get some character relations between Will and Ned, where you see how Ned, reaffirms that Will is a violent man and has a troubled backstory. Beyond troubled, the guy's a murderer. But he also offers, friendship and tries to kind of get him back on board. He listens to his stories. He listens to his sort of confessions, right? He is this somewhat level of support for Will, while still not giving him necessarily like forgiveness, right? And again, we could probably talk about this for much longer, but that's just a quick little interpretation. So again, keep an eye out for scenes like that build up the character and start decoding some themes that the film's exploring. Okay, so let's keep going. We already did the Unforgiven video. We already talked about it. So now I'm going to talk about character types. We have two broad types: round characters or flat characters. Round characters follow the 7 elements of character, or at least most of them. They offer empathy, motivation, distinct worldview. And this is this is the kind of piece that I always like for a definition for a round or complex character. Round characters possess subtle, repressed, or even contradictory traits that can change through the story. If a character isn't complex and doesn't have room to grow, then the narrative isn't going to be saying much. There's not going to be much of a message there, right? We need to have that sort of human connection and see their transformation to unlock the implicit meaning in some way. Character complexity is human, thus leads to audience empathy for the character. We see ourselves through the character with specific personality and behavioral traits. Choices may be based on emotions over plot. The character's perspective evolves through the course of the story, leading to character development. Then on the other end, we have flat characters. Flat characters are usually side characters, but if a film isn't very well written, it could very much be the protagonist or even the antagonist. But flat characters exhibit few distinct traits. They do not change through the story. And I'm just going to pause there for a second. Just because a character doesn't change by the end of the story doesn't necessarily mean that it's not, say, a well thought out narrative, right? Sometimes that could be a message, but just keep in mind, usually transformation is a big deal. These characters may be considered as cliche or stock. It's an oversimplified portrayal of a person. For example, the tough army sergeant or the drill instructor who just yells at troops, right, to get in line in boot camp. That's a cliche. Their role/title defines them. Beyond what they do, what role they serve, we learn very little about them. There's no context of personal life or character relations or character complexity. Okay, so we're going to do another little activity here, and you're going to see you're going to see like 4 clips, but you're going to see 2 characters introduced here. And these are villains, right? These are both antagonists in their own stories that, in my opinion, one is flat and one is round, but you might have a different interpretation. But just to kind of set up the video, you're going to see the characters explicitly speak their motivation, why they want what they want. And you're going to see it first from General Hummel, Ed Harris's character from The Rock. He'll speak his motivation. Then he'll cut to the other character, which is Obadiah Stane, Jeff Bridges' character from Iron Man, who's speaking his motivation. And take note, right? Consider, why do they want what they want? And is one maybe a more human need than the other? Is one more complex than the other? Then you're going to see both of those villains in action, both of those characters in action. And I think this is an important one. Decode their will to act when they're confronted with action. How does General Hummel, what tactics does he use in the action scene versus what tactics does Obadiah Stane use in his action scene? Okay, and then by the end of it, consider who's flat, who's round, who do you find more interesting, and why. All right, so here we go. Hopefully this video works a little bit more smoothly. Okay.
Frank, Sal Kramer.
Hi, Al. How you doing?
I don't know, Frank. Why don't you tell me? Got a lot of very, very worried people here, Frank.
I'll come straight to the point. 83 Force Reconnaissance Marines have died under my various commands. 47 in northern Laos and southern China. Remember Operation Desert Storm? Those surgical hits made by our smart bombs covered so well on CNN? It was my men on the ground that made those hits possible by lasing the targets. 20 of them were left to rot outside Baghdad after the conflict ended. No benefits were paid to their families. No medals conferred. These men died for their country and they weren't even given a goddamn military burial. The situation is unacceptable. You will transfer $100 million from the Grand Cayman Red Sea Trading Company account to an account I designate. From these funds, reparations of $1 million will be paid to each of the 83 Marines' families. The rest of the funds I will disperse at my discretion. Do I make myself clear?
Ninth Symphony. Oh, what a masterpiece. Look at that. This is your legacy. A new generation of weapons with this at its heart. Weapons that will help steer the world back on course. Put the balance of power in our hands. Too bad you had to involve Pepper in this. I would have preferred that she lived.
Drop your weapon! Drop them! Stand back! Hold your fire! Hold your fire!
This is General Hummel. Drop your weapons. Drop them!
Anderson here, General Hummel. Commander. Team leader.
Commander Anderson, if you have any concern for the lives of your men, you will order them to safety their weapons and place them on the deck.
This is not happening.
I'm not gonna ask again. Don't do anything stupid. No one has to die here.
For 30 years I've been holding you up. I built this company for nothing. And nothing is gonna stand in my way. Least of all, you.
Okay, so let's talk about these for a second. Again, hopefully you're reflecting as we go here. But I am going to talk about it since we can't engage otherwise. That sounded weird, but you know what I mean. I just kind of want to reinforce some things since I'm not able to hear your responses. So we have General Hummel, and we have trying to find a single shot of him, but I guess there isn't one. And then we have Obadiah Stane. So let's look at General Hummel. Is he round or is he flat? Why? Give you a second to reflect. Think about his motivation. What is his motivation? Okay, I'm going to answer his motivation. He is a general looking for reparations for his troops, right? His fallen troops who, you know, died in the battlefield and their family was kind of, you know, left. What's the word I'm looking for? He wants some sort of supportive services for his fallen comrades' families, right? That's essentially what his motivation is. And, you know, his process of doing so is holding a bunch of people hostage, right? Obviously not good, right? He's the villain. But if we look at his motivation, it's somewhat more ethical and at least understandable. And it comes from compassion in its own weird way, right? For his fallen soldiers, his fallen comrades. I feel like there's a better word for that. But yes, in comparison to Obadiah Stane, whose motivation is pretty generic, right? He even has the line, with this device, we'll have the power in our hands to essentially control the world, right? A very sort of cliche stock motivation. This guy is power hungry. Okay. So we see these two different motivations, right? One is a little bit more, let me get to Hummel, a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more understandable. And then when we see these characters in action, right, if we focus on will to act, when Hummel is confronted with this is not really the protagonist, but we'll kind of, cheat and think that it is, but when he's confronted with action, Hummel doesn't want to engage, right? He even has the line, no one has to die here today. So he chooses his tactics carefully. He doesn't want to use violence, which again tells us something about this character. Again, his process of accomplishing his goal is not correct, but we somewhat understand his motivation, and we see him in action being, again, more human and relatable and caring about human life, in comparison to Obadiah Stane, who's in this big robot suit smashing Tony around and also doesn't care about civilian life, right? He blows up the bus as he walks away. Oops, trying to get to that frame. Right, so again, we see he's not concerned with casualties, with civilian life in comparison to Hummel. Their will to act is very different. So my argument would be General Hummel is more of a round character than Obadiah Stane, both because his motivation comes from a sincere place, a more human place, and he has, again, his own way, care for his enemy, essentially, right? He doesn't want to hurt them. Okay. Again, this is kind of strange for me because I'm doing this alone. Again, usually there's a conversation, but I hope that made sense. Whoops. Okay. Now we're going to move into dialogue. Dialogue, just a quick definition, the words that the character or characters speak on and off screen. Dialogue is arguably one of the most pivotal aspects of film. And why I say that is because, again, if we go back to like making of a scene, the written scene is sort of it's the first level of encoding, right? The text, the speech that people are supposed to say in a scene is communicating themes and topics and expressions. And in your analysis papers, often you will be quoting key lines of dialogue that usually act as thematic exposition. So quoting dialogue will probably be part of your filmic evidence for the analysis paper. Decode key lines of dialogue for meaning. Most writers spend a lot of time crafting dialogue, and it usually contributes to the implicit meaning and or character. Okay, so we have some dialogue types. This is pretty self-explanatory, and again, I'm going to show you a video that will demonstrate all three of these, but the most basic dialogue types: narration, monologue, conversation. Narration is commentary spoken by either off-screen or on-screen voices. The narration may be from an outside storyteller talking over a scene. It can also be a character relating a story in flashback. So we see a flashback and the protagonist is telling us about the flashback over the scene. Or it could be a narrative device to communicate the inner thoughts of a character within a scene. Monologue is a speech or a long story spoken by one character. It may be spoken directly to the camera or to other characters. And then conversation, which is what we are mostly going to see, and what we mostly see in film, I should rephrase that. What we mostly see in film is conversation. This is just dialogue exchange between two or more characters. Okay. So I'm going to show you the video. Again, I don't even know if we really need to talk about it, but I want to show you examples of each of these dialogue types. And when I show the video, take note of the lower thirds, and I think there are titles in front of each one that demonstrate this is narration, this is monologue, this is conversation. All right, so here we go. Try that one more time. Okay.
I hardly said a word to my wife until I said yes to a divorce. When I was here, I wanted to be there. When I was there, all I could think of was getting back into the jungle. I a week now. Waiting for a mission. Getting softer.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels.
Yeah, I don't know what happened on the screen there, but it looks like it went away. So I'm just going to resume it. I'll go back just a bit so we have a clean break for our conversation example.
And most people here seem so happy with so little. It's like they don't even seem to care what happens to them.
That's because it doesn't matter what happens to them. They're nothing. Might as well die. Fuck Mercury.
Thank you. This place blows. I need to get back to Minneapolis.
Take me with you.
Excuse me?
Take me with you. You know, to the Minneapolis.
You're good here, Sandra.
Oh.
Okay, so again, pretty self-explanatory, but just very quickly, we have narration. Our character is speaking their inner thoughts in the scene, and it just plays over the scene, right? We don't see them talking on screen. So narration. And then monologue. Go to the monologue one. Long speech from this character. And then conversation. Pretty self-explanatory. Just a dialogue scene between two or more characters, which again is what we're mostly going to see. Okay. So let's go back to, there we go. Okay. Dialogue functions. This is very important. Dialogue can function in a few ways. And again, this is regardless of the type. This can be a monologue, narration, or conversation. Excuse me. Okay. Okay, so dialogue is exposition, plot exposition. This is when a character literally speaks / explains the plot to another character. This is usually used to catch up the audience and clear up any confusion regarding the plot of the film. It can clear up character motivations, act as world building, or setting up the rules. And again, we'll see examples of these, but essentially plot exposition is just to kind of catch up the audience, right? So characters will usually speak to one another to explain certain things, to get everyone kind of up to speed on the plot at the moment. Thematic exposition. This is dialogue that speaks to the implicit meaning / thematic objective. This is very important. You are often going to quote thematic exposition. It's literally stating the themes of the film out loud, and or dialogue is metaphorical to the themes. Some examples here is war is hell, life finds a way, life is like a box of chocolates. And again, we'll see a video with an example of this. So yeah, okay. Sorry, it's getting a little late and I've done a couple of these in a row. So stick with me. Sorry about some of the disruptions. Okay, in addition to dialogue acting as exposition, either plot exposition or thematic, we have dialogue as character building. This is dialogue that acts I'm sorry, this is where characters often say their inner feelings aloud via dialogue. Also take note of a character's choice to not reveal certain information or to lie about certain information to other characters. Characters speaking their backstory out loud. The way a character speaks can say a lot about them, from accents to vocabulary. Are they a smooth talker or constantly tripping up on their words? Do they use profanity? Do they watch their language? Do they use profanity in front of certain characters, but not other characters? How characters converse with other characters to establish relationships. How is a relationship established based on either the depth or superficiality of a conversation? The familiarity between the characters through choice of words in a conversation. So again, with dialogue as character building, sometimes it's very explicit. Character will literally be talking about their backstory, or it'll be sort of implied through conversations with other characters via character relations. Okay, so we're gonna watch this video and we'll see these dialogue functions at play. Each one of these will be labeled, but for the inception scene, notice how the dialogue is being used as plot exposition. How Ariadne, Ellen Page's character, is sort of an audience surrogate, and Leonardo DiCaprio's character, I don't remember his name, is speaking to Ellen Page to sort of talk about the rules of incepting dreams, and just kind of note what rules are being established in this scene so we can understand the world of film. Then we'll see an example of thematic exposition. This will be from the film Pursuit of Happiness. And it's not really a monologue, it's a very brief monologue, but just kind of maybe take note of a line or two that is very clear thematic exposition. How is Chris, Will Smith's character, communicating the themes of the film? How does this monologue act as a thesis for the film? And then we'll see an example for character building with a scene from The Master, which sort of like the scene from Unforgiven, Freddie, Joaquin Phoenix's character, is talking about his backstory. That being said, take note of how he's saying it, what pieces of information he's sort of holding on to, what he doesn't want to reveal about himself, and what does that kind of tell us about that character. And also take note of some acting choices and nonverbal cues. So how he says some of these things, his use of pausing, what else? And physical actions that he uses to sort of restrict saying or revealing some of this information about him. What does that tell us about Freddie? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share now.
Now, in a dream, our mind continuously does this. We create and perceive our world simultaneously, and our mind does this so well that we don't even know what's happening. That allows us to get right in the middle of that process.
How?
By taking over the creating part. Now, this is where I need you. You create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their subconscious.
How could I ever acquire enough detail to make them think that it's reality?
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something was actually strange.
Hey. Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. Not even me. All right?
All right.
You got a dream, you got to protect it. People People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it. You want something, go get it. Period.
Does this bougie make poison?
Not if you drink it, smart.
Are you trying to poison me?
No.
Where's your father?
Dead.
How did he die?
Drunk.
Where's your mother? Where's your mother?
Loony bin.
She's psychotic.
Yes.
What is the name of your aunt?
Bertha.
How did you come to have sex with your auntie Bertha?
I was drunk and she looked good.
And you did it again and again?
Yes.
Have you ever had bad thoughts about Master Peggy?
Yes.
What did you think?
I thought you were fools.
Am I a fool to you?
No, sir.
If you were locked in a room for the rest of your life, who would be in there with you?
Doris.
Who's Doris?
Best girl I ever met. Girl I'm gonna marry one day.
Is she in Lynn?
Yes.
Lynn, Massachusetts?
Yes, sir.
Why aren't you with her?
I'm an idiot.
Why aren't you with that lovely girl?
I got no reason. I'm a fool.
Do you love Doris?
Yes.
Is she the love of your life?
Yes, sir.
Why aren't you with her?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Tell me why you're not with her if you love her so much.
I told her I'd come back, and I never went back, and now I gotta get back to her.
Why don't you go back?
I don't know.
Why don't you go
I don't know!
Close your eyes.
Okay. So again, hopefully you're kind of reflecting on some of these prompts. But I'll talk a little bit over them because we don't have the ability to kind of have a conversation about them. So this is our plot exposition scene. And notice how, and again, I'm not even going to play the dialogue, but even down to DiCaprio's character, Cobb, is drawing the little diagram for Ellen Page's character, Ariande, and giving us sort of like a visual representation of what they do, right? They incept dreams, and he even talks about, you know, now I want to play a little bit of the dialogue.
By taking over the creating part, now this is where I need you. You create the world of the dream. We bring the subject into that dream, and they fill it with their subconscious.
How could I ever acquire enough detail to make them think that it's reality?
Well, dreams, they feel real while we're in them, right? It's only when we wake up that we realize something's actually strange.
Okay, right, and even the point where Ariande kind of asks that one question, it's priming the other character to reveal more about this process for us as the audience to understand that, hey, once they start entering dreams, we get it, right? The rules are built. Now let's look at the thematic exposition scene. And again, this isn't really a monologue, it's a very brief monologue, but I think the core of it is, hopefully I fast forward to the right part, but I think it's right here.
Dream, you gotta protect it. People can't do something themselves. They want to tell you you can't do it.
Okay, so I'm just gonna pause there for a second. So it's not only the idea of, you know, pursuing your dream at any cost. Okay, I'm also gonna just pause for a second. Sorry, my dog is barking. 1 second. Okay, hopefully you didn't even really notice much of a gap there. But anyway, as I was kind of trying to explain this piece of thematic exposition, Will Smith's character isn't only saying you have to follow your dreams at any cost, but he's also kind of talking about where his character is at this point in this film. It's about supporting someone to follow their dreams, but also letting them know that sometimes people are going to stand in your way and dissuade you from pursuing your dreams or your ambitions out of their own kind of lack of confidence. And that's kind of where this scene starts at. And Will Smith's character kind of checks in with that philosophy and projects it back to the audience. So again, some very clear thematic exposition there. Then in the scene from The Master, this is all character building, right? We learn a lot about Freddy's character, but were there any kind of moments that, that's what we're looking for, kind of popped out at you that you kind of took note of? So one for me is the part where Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, who we don't see, right? This is also an example of a long take, right? We're not cutting to Philip Seymour Hoffman's side of the scene. We're just on Joaquin Phoenix, and we hold on him as this scene progresses. But the moment where Philip Seymour Hoffman asks Joaquin Phoenix about his mother, and we notice that Phoenix's character, Freddy, doesn't reveal that piece of information. He hesitates. And then Philip Seymour Hoffman asks again, and then he reveals Looney Bin. Right? That tells us something about the character. Obviously, we learn about some troubles of mental health in his past, and maybe it's genetic for Freddy. But on a deeper level, we learn that Freddy is uncomfortable admitting this. Right? He doesn't want to reveal this piece of information, and that tells us something about him. Right? Maybe Freddy doesn't want to acknowledge his mother. Maybe he's, unfortunately embarrassed by his mother, and maybe that says something about his character. Or maybe Freddy is, what's the word I'm looking for? Trying to persuade himself that maybe he may need some mental health support, right? He's in denial. There can be many things. There can be just this sort of idea of a stigma around mental health that Freddy kind of puts on his shoulders, right? There's many things that we can kind of learn about him other than what's being explicitly stated. Okay. So I'm going to go back. We're almost done. Okay. So we went over dialogue functions. We talked about them all. All right, so just as an overview, the 4 parts of script encoding that you're going to use here is narrative, structure, character, dialogue. We just talked all about them. For narrative, it's mostly going to be looking at plot as metaphor to kind of link to the implicit meaning. Structure is just to kind of give you an idea of basically the beats of a traditional narrative or a 3-act structure, and how, say, the hero's journey links to a character arc, and how a character arc can then link to the implicit meaning. We investigated the 7 elements of character and how things like motivation and will to act takes a crucial part in building up the themes of the film. And then we looked at dialogue types, narration, monologue, conversation, and dialogue functions, plot exposition, thematic exposition, and character building. Okay. I guess I'll go over this. So I'm going to get into the pre-production presentation. I might not spend a ton of time on this, but just to kind of give an overview. Okay. Whoops. There we go. Okay. And just to kind of give you a preview, the photo that we're seeing is a script read with the director, the co-writer, and the cast of, oh boy, I'm forgetting the name of it, Star Wars The Force Awakens. I think that was the kind of reboot one. But this is a script reading, and you see, let me use my little tool here, see the director, J.J. Abrams, with his cast, Harrison Ford, Daisy Ridley, Carrie Fisher, and they all have the script in front of them, and they're going to actually do a script reading where they read the dialogue for their characters. This is pre-production. Okay. So pre-production rundown, we have the script, secure financing, storyboards, auditions, rehearsal, scheduling, which I kind of talked about before, but we'll keep going here. So the idea that the screenplay is written, this could be from an independent writer who wrote the script on spec. Whenever someone says a script was written on spec, this means that the writer wrote it themselves. The producers didn't reach out to them and say, hey, can you write this idea into a full-length script? Instead, the writer decided, hey, I want to write this narrative into a script, and they shop around the finished script studios, or they link up with independent producers who kind of find funding for the film. This could be from a producer / studio who had an idea or IP and assigned it to a writer to write a draft. We talked about that before. And then the script is submitted through development. So now the script is written, and we start to develop the script on usually like with the director or the studio. So the first draft of the script is submitted to the studio. the studio may request a writer to do more drafts based on studio heads or producers' notes. Notes can range from structure to color of the protagonist's shirt. So what I mean by that is someone may submit a script to the studio may buy the script, and maybe that script is about, I don't know, space pirates. Okay, and when they submit that script, the producer looks at the script and goes, you know what? People are bored with outer space adventures. What if they're underwater pirates, right? So everything now takes place underwater. That's a goofy example, but that's an idea of like a developmental note. Okay, the studio may hire another writer to do another draft based on their notes. This happens a lot. I mentioned this at the start of this presentation, but even if only one writer is credited on a script, often other writers have done passes on the script. The director has done a pass on the script. Some writers do a page one rewrite. So again, let's say we had our space pirate script. It's now an underwater pirate script. And they say, you know what? The protagonist character arc isn't really coming through. So now we're going to take this script and hand it off to another writer, and they're going to focus on developing this character over the 3 acts of the film. And that writer may do a page one rewrite, right, to sort of develop this character along the way. Some writers only focus on certain areas. A lot of large movies, again, like Marvel movies, will actually have a finished script and then bring in like comedy writers to add jokes to the script, like what's what I'm looking for, like comedy punch-ups to the script. Okay. Then let's say the screenplay is finally completed, it's locked, the screenplay is satisfactory with the studio. Again, dozens of writers may have worked on several drafts. Some get credit, some don't. If you ever see I guess I'll use my little text tool. We'll see how this works. If a script is written by Sue and Bob, that means that Sue and Bob worked on the script together. But sometimes you'll see Sue and Bob, and then you'll see and Larry. Of course, all these people have last names. But if you ever see and, that tells us that a separate writer came in, and did a draft. You don't need to know that, but just, I guess, a little bit of trivia. Okay. WGA, which is the Writers Guild of America, grants credit based on who contributed the most towards plot, characters, dialogue, and scenes. So again, many writers may work on a script, but if you only threw in a couple jokes, you probably won't get credit. You'll get paid from the studio, but you won't get credit on the finished film because your writing wasn't drastic enough. The script then gets a green light once, let me look at this. Script gets a green light once release slot and budget is determined. Every studio has a slate of releases every year. So often a studio will have like thousands of scripts, and they go, well, we have, just for example, we're Universal Pictures and we have 12 slots open in the year to release a film in theaters. And they'll go, well, we need an action film, we need 2 comedies, we need 3 horror movies, and that's going to start building up their release schedule. And now they're going to go to their scripts and go, well, this script's ready to go for our horror film. Okay, we're going to put this in October. We're going to give this a budget of $20 million. Okay, well, now that script is now greenlit, and it's going to go into production. Whoops, I got my eraser tool going on. There we go. So I forgot I had this separate slide. So I already did it with my goofy text tool. But again, the credit that you usually see on usually the beginning credits is it'll say written by. If a film says written by, I don't know, written by Zoe Kazan, that means that she came up with the story and the script is credited to this person. So it's the story and the full script. So written by, the story and the script is credited to this person. If you see this and symbol, I forget the proper term for that. That means that there's a team, which I kind of already talked about. So it could be Zoe Kazan and, I'm trying to think of another writer, and David Ayer. That'd be a very weird team. But they may have worked on the script together. But if you actually see and written out, that means there's a separate group of writers. if you see screenplay by, this means that the script, scene to scene, characters and dialogue was written by this person, but was adapted from a story. And often if you see screenplay by, you'll see a separate credit that'll say story by, and that's the person who conceived the overall story / idea, but someone else wrote it. So again, written by, that's the person that they came up with the story and then wrote the full script. Screenplay by usually means that they adapted it from another source. Okay, for a director, again, this is sort of on a studio level, but if the director didn't develop the project themselves, then the studio has have directors come in and pitch for the project. So a director may offer a lookbook. A lookbook can be a series of photographs or a series of screen grabs from other films that they want the film to look like. They're sort of pitching the studio, hey, the movie's gonna look like Seven, Fight Club, and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and I'm going to show you different stills from that film to kind of give you that idea. They may also draft up storyboards, which is something we'll get into on Module 17, but these are essentially sketches of compositions. Reference materials like sizzle reels, which would be like editing together different scenes from other movies. The director offers their take on a project. This may lead to even more rewrites or the director rewriting the script, or at least offering notes. Okay, now the director is on board. Once the director is attached, the project goes into active development. The studio / producers may try to get talent like big actors to sign on to the film so they can package the film to other financiers to back the film. The director continues to develop the script, either providing the current writer notes, rewriting the script themselves, or bringing on their own writer. And then the studio pre-sells that project to certain foreign markets. So just kind of pause on this. A lot of times you'll see that movies are distributed in different countries by different studios. So I'm trying to think of an example, and I can't right now. But say, I should probably have one of these in the back of my head, but I don't. But just for example, we'll say Bad Boys for Life. This is not true. I'm pretty sure Sony has global distribution, but let's pretend. So Sony, who produced the film, may also distribute it in North America. But then they decided to sell it to Alliance, or well, Alliance is a bad example. They decided to sell it to Warner Brothers, so they distributed it to I don't know. This is a huge generalization, but all foreign territories. And now Warner Brothers takes in a cut, but they also spend money to market it in foreign territories. That's a weird example, but hopefully that makes sense. And again, when you sell it to foreign territories, the studio is making money off of that. Okay. Then the director continues pre-production with their crew. We talked about some of these roles already, but the director will start prepping the film with their cinematographer, location scout, casting director, writers, executive producer, line producer, development producer, assistant director. And I'm going to go over just a few of these. A location scout is a person who finds and secures locations for the shoot. Some films will shoot all on a stage or all in a studio, but many films shoot on location, or at least some locations are on location, so actually like out in the field and out in the real world. And location scouts go out there, take photographs of these locations, send it to the director and says, hey, you like this coffee shop? Yes, I do. Can you secure the location? Location scout sets that up. Casting director, they hold auditions for actors for various roles. They usually have like a pool of actors that they pull from. And then they audition actors. The actors have sides, which are just pages from the script that they audition with. Sometimes the director sits in on auditions. Oftentimes stars do not have to audition and they're offer only. So for example, like, I'm trying to think of an example, like Will Smith. Will Smith does not audition for movies. He's actually kind of a different example because he often produces his own movies. But if someone's reaching out to Will Smith for a role, he's offer only. Brad Pitt, Jennifer Lawrence, you know, a lot of the big stars. But when you're auditioning, if you go to the second round, you then have a screen test where you're actually on camera performing the scene. And that's usually the kind of the final round for casting. Writers. A production will usually keep a writer or more on staff to execute any necessary rewrites. Rewrites can range from, again, changes to the plot to production requirements, right? We can no longer film at the amusement park. Can you rewrite this scene to take place in a museum? Well, the writer on staff will take care of that. Executive producer. Executive producers line up the financing for the film. This can range from reaching out to private investors. This can be like in like the 80s. For some reason, like dentists were really into this, and they would invest in like independent cinema. But private investors, studio funds, or pre-sales for like foreign markets. The development producer, they oversee the development of the project and pre-production. They offer development notes and are in charge of hiring. The assistant director, they are in charge with scheduling the day-to-day shoot. And then this kind of one of the final steps before production, there's a script read-through, which I showed you the picture of. But usually the director and their cast read through the script together. So, you know, they're not acting out the role necessarily, but it's sort of like an 80% of what they would be doing on set when they're actually filming it, but just to get an ear for the dialogue. And if they have time, this kind of has gone by the wayside, but there used to be months of rehearsals. So now we go to a stage and actually get the scene on its feet, and actors play out the scene. And now the director can work with the actors to tweak the scene. That doesn't happen as much. Rehearsals, especially for independent films, usually doesn't happen. Usually get like one rehearsal on set and then you start filming. And then for sort of like big action set pieces or sequences with a lot of computer animation, there may be previs that's done in pre-production. Costly sequences are often choreographed beforehand. This can be like stunt sequences where stunt teams sort of film like a practice run without the principal cast there. So stunt performers run through choreography and film it and actually show it to the director. Effects, so like CGI, you see previs animation, that's sort of like lo-fi animation of the final sequence to give the director an idea of how that CGI sequence will play. And then when we see it in the finished version, it's a fully rendered and animated sequence. Okay, so that's the pre-production presentation. And now I'm going to talk about the assignments. So again, making this very clear, quiz 2 is due September 8th by 11:59 p.m. Same process as quiz 1, but now it's going to be on all the material from this presentation, anything script and pre-production related. I'm not going to show you the link for that. Again, same process as quiz 1. What I am going to talk about is reflection paper 1. Reflection paper 1 is due 9/8, okay, by 11:59 p.m. I would recommend you plan like 1 to 2 hours to complete this. So let me show you the assignment. I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to go to Canvas. Give me 1 second. Okay, so again, I'm in sort of instructor mode on Canvas, so it's going to look a little bit different, but this will give you the general idea. Okay, so we're on our Canvas page, and again, for the assignments, you can just work it through on the module. So if I move over to script and pre-production, I see quiz 2, so you need to do that. But let's check out reflection paper 1. So reflection paper 1, due September 8th, it's worth 70 points. I'm gonna go ahead and click that assignment. It'll bring me over. There we go. So obviously everything is listed here, but I do want to talk about it very quickly. The video that you are supposed to watch is linked in here. It's already submitted, so all you have to do is press play. Okay. I'm just mute this for a second. But make sure you actually watch the entire video. I know it's 20 minutes long, but yeah. The video is going to kind of walk you through each thing, and I have some questions that are all listed right here, 8 questions, and I'm just looking for you to offer script-based evidence. So for example, what is T'Challa's / Black Panther's character arc? So just give me a sentence or two on what his arc is. And again, the video walks you through everything. I even provide you like character names and the director co-writer. And in the kind of first few minutes, I offer some recap of like the prologue and Act 1. That takes up to like minute 5, I think. I also offer some topics. So when I ask you what the implicit meaning is, I'm just going to kind of skip to it. When I ask for the implicit meaning, you can refer to the topics which will come after this text. That will go into my second question. What do you think Ryan Coogler, the co-writer and director, is trying to say through T'Challa's / Black Panther's character arc? And again, I have some topics here that you can, topic/themes that you can kind of, what's what I'm looking for, adapt into your thematic objective. Then we start getting into the actual key scenes. And I'm gonna unmute this for a second.
Take him away. Ungubani, Indingu, Intadaka, Unyanaka.
Okay, so the key scenes actually have the dialogue, and I'm going to ask you to quote one line of dialogue for each character. Again, just follow the instructions with the questions, but I just kind of wanted to walk you through what the video looks like and some things that you need to pay attention to. Again, this shouldn't take anything more than 2 hours. And then make sure you submit your document via a .doc/.docx file in the proper format. I went over that, I believe, in Module 1, how to do that with my screen share, so it should be pretty clear. And then for the resources, I have the presentations for the script presentation linked. Okay. So I think that's it. I'm going to look back at the PowerPoint just to make sure I'm not missing anything. So that's it. Quiz 2, due September 8th. Reflection paper 1, due September 8th. Okay, that's it. I'll see you next module.